Hello, everybody. I want to thank you for having me. Thank the Grandmasters for setting up this event. My name's Tim Ramos. I'm the Republican candidate for mayor. I'm 34 years old. I'm a lifelong resident of Allentown. My parents, who are in the back, they moved us here in 1987. I was 2.5 years old. Even though I was so young, I actually remember my mother and my Aunt Sonia singing with a little cake very quietly the day we were moving into our house, singing happy birthday to me. I don't know why I remember that, but that's one of the memories that stick out to me. I went to Washington Elementary, Trexler Middle School, and I'm a William Allen graduate. I have literally, this is my life. One of the gentlemen was talking about remembering people in this community. My family lives on Front Street, 2nd Street, 7th Street, 8th Street, 9th Street. I live on 14th Street. There's over 100 of us still in the city of Allentown. I'm the youngest of 7, and I'm the youngest of 7 children, and I'm the youngest of 42 grandchildren. My wife, very beautiful, she's sitting in the corner. Her name is Mayoral. We got married 15 years ago, and we have 5 children, and we're raising them right here in the same community we grew up in, because aside of being very smart, they are smarter than I was at their age. They're all straight-A students. We understand, because we come from this community, the benefit of having not only book smarts, but having street smarts, having life skills in a very diverse community that we come from. And I look at that as a blessing and an asset to our young people, not as a liability. To just tell you about myself, I'm a blue-collar worker. I've pretty much done every job, every labor-intensive job you could think of. I worked for Kutztown Steel Foundry coming out of high school. In that job, everybody starts on the ground floor. That's with a grinder in your hand that weighs about 85 pounds, and you're with that grinder for about 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week mandatory. I was a 19-year-old kid, probably weighed about 130 pounds. I was the smallest, youngest guy in the whole warehouse, and I did that job for a year and a half and learned a lot there, just about the men I was working alongside of, about what hard work looked like. The city of Allentown is facing many problems. You name it, we're facing it. And those are the things that have motivated me to step up to the plate and to bring change to the city of Allentown. Just to let you know, I have served in my church for many, many years. I created a nonprofit organization called the Holy Underground. I made it official in 2008. But I was working in the ministry since 2003, doing outreach to at-risk teens in drug addiction, abuse, gangs. I know what it is to go down, run into a crowd of 150, ready to pull out guns and kill each other. I know what it is to take guns, turn them into the police, and go through that whole process. And thousands of young people are still with us today because of the work that me and some of my friends and even my brother who's sitting in the back have done. Just being advocates for these young people and agents of change within our community. We didn't sit around, and to just touch base on what the one brother in the back was talking about in terms of our brothers coming home from prison. To me, it takes us. It takes us being willing to create an environment for our brothers and sisters that come home to say, do not entertain the ghettoization of our people no more. It is time for us to stand up as a community. And you can see it on my face. I'm one of those guys, I wear my emotions because I'm passionate about my community. And this stuff, it aggravates me on one hand, and it hurts me in the other, but it motivates me, and I stay motivated. I just came from, earlier I came from it's an after-school program that I run where I'm training kids to box, and I get to spend 2 days a week with 15 to 30 kids, and this is what we talk about. And I train them in boxing, and I do what I'm supposed to do, but that's my avenue to say, hey guys, don't talk like that. Don't entertain that nonsense. And this is what I believe we need in cities like ours, for our men, older men, the men now, men of my age, to look at these young people and say, no, no brother, no sister, we're not gonna entertain that nonsense. No more in our community. And we need to be willing to hold each other accountable. The one gentleman talked about qualification. Well, I can tell you, I have no formal education. I didn't go to college. I did, but I actually was led astray when taking my classes. And while I wasn't very great at algebra, I had a gentleman put me in my electronics course where I was doing trigonometry all day. So you do the math. I wasn't good at algebra, but I'm doing trigonometry in my course materials. Aside of that, I could do the work. I just couldn't write down for you the formula. So anyway, but look, while that's not my experience lies in the chambers of city council, fighting for the rights of Allentonians, fighting for everyone in this room who lives in Allentown. I fought against things like the eminent domaining of private property. The government, our city government, used force to take private property all the way down Hamilton and give it to another private owner. And once they were informed this is against the law, guess what? They said, we're going to do it anyway. Why? Because there was a second, what I believe, an underhanded interest in that. And they gave private property to private owners. That's against the law, guys. I fought against that. They wanted to put a trash incinerator on the east side. Why would you want to put a trash incinerator on the east side? And they said, oh, well, you won't, it doesn't create a smell. It doesn't, don't worry about it. There's no chemical fallback, so put it in your neighborhood. Don't put it in our neighborhood. I fought against that. I was there many times fighting against these things in city council and fighting for the rights of our community. And many times I was alone. If there was anyone else there, it was my brother Stephen Ramos. It was people like Lou Hirschman, Mr. Hunsiker, Mr. Hahn. I can tell you guys, literally, 5 guys. Anytime city council, and we have a city council member here, and she can tell you that, yeah, it's pretty much the same faces every time fighting against these things. And even when we disagree, it is what it is, but they believe they're doing something that helps Allentown. I believe, and we have our opinion. If I see it as something that's going to hurt us, I'm going to fight against it. We had a law that was passed, union-only contracts. Now, I know some people support unions. I worked for a union when I was at Kutztown Steel Foundry. What they said was to work in the NIS projects, all that construction that's going on, any contract that was $250,000 or more, union only. Well, guess what? In Lehigh County, only 15% of our workers are union. How many of those live in Allentown? And when the work finally did come, our guys locally waited. And I know because I would go up to guys, hey, let me see your book. Hey, where are you coming from? Oh, I'm from California. I'm from Detroit. I'm from Jersey. I'm from New York. I'm from Philadelphia. And you know, I have no problem with people coming to the city of Allentown to make money. But if we're going to create laws that say union only, can we use our union? Can we use our workers? So that's what I believe in. And that's what I've done. My qualifications rest there. Fighting for our rights. Standing up. Because you know what? I come from a place, like I said, my mother and father are right in the back. And my grandparents came from Puerto Rico in about the 30s or 40s, and they came to New York City, and what they did was they brought other people from Puerto Rico to New York and from all over Latin America, and they would bring them to New York City. They would help them get nationalized and become citizens. And a joke that was one of my great aunts said, I remember when she said this when my grandmother, we were burying her, she said, I love my sister-in-law, and she goes, and I remember when we came from Puerto Rico, and those were tough days because to go to the bathroom, you had to walk over about 20 or 30 people in a small apartment in New York City flat. That's where we come from. My grandparents taught us the value of service and serving others. My father continued that work, and that's what we saw of him as we grew up, how to serve others, and that's what I do now. My aim and my goal is to restore the city of Allentown to be a prosperous city. We can't do that by having an unbalanced budget and have representatives of our city council and our city hall and our mayor telling us we passed a fiscally responsible budget. Meanwhile, it's unbalanced. That's an ironic statement. Those two things don't match. We can't tax our people at 27% more than what they're already struggling to pay and then say, oh, well, you know, we're doing this for you. No, you're not doing it for me. And I'm just going to I'm one of those guys, I call things as I see it, guys. The city of Allentown has 6 times in the last 40 years attempted a gentrification of the urban core. 6 times in 40 years. And this is nothing new. I'm a Christian too, brother, and I believe that the Bible says there is nothing new under the sun. The first time that the city of Allentown, somebody came from another place in the country, moved to Allentown, and gentrified their working class from their urban center was 30 years roughly after Allentown's creation. So this is a system that has continued for well over 250 years. And now, after many years of redlining blacks and Hispanics and poor whites into center city neighborhoods, now that they want to profit and create a economic boom, they don't want us down there. And that's why I encourage a lot of people. It's not about this. It's about this. Because they don't want our poor white people just as much as they don't want us. It's about the working class in the city of Allentown. And that's why when you see a person like me who steps up to the plate, I have the character, the gut, the grit to step up to the plate, to fight against anybody and anything, because I believe in doing what is right. Not what is right for me, because a true leader believes in serving others. And you know what? Sometimes when you're serving others, it comes at a cost. It comes at a personal cost. And my wife can tell you we've paid that cost many times, out of our pocket, out of our time, out of our personal lives. If you believe that the city of Allentown needs change, if you believe it needs a leader who's willing to fight for this community, I look forward to being your mayor in the coming year, and I look forward to doing great work with this city. Thank you.
Hold on. Wait, keep it short. Keep it short.
Come closer.
Let me ask you a question. You said there's a whole lot of things that's going on in Pennsylvania, right? And there's a lot of big things, you know. So what is one of the things that you intend to try to change to make it better for the masses?
For the masses,
I heard a few things you said, but
yeah.
what is that one big platform that you stand on to say that I'm going to do this for the masses?
Okay, and here's something, and I'm going to tell you, and this is why you know I'm in it for the fight, because I'm going to get fought by both sides, okay? Now, I'm the Republican candidate, but I can confidently say that people who are at the top on both sides are going to not like this. I'm for a true ward system, returning Allentown to a ward system where you need to live in the districts that you aim to represent so that you can get elected. As it is right now, our city council is citywide. So guess what? The truth of the matter is that 5 of them live in Citronia, I believe, or at least 4 of them. One of them lives down, they're at the outskirts of town, guys. They can cross the street and be in Whitehall, be in Salisbury, or go a block down and be in another town. And I want, in the 70s, up until the 70s, I was informed on this by my friend Joe Hoffman, who's running for city council, that this was the practice up until the 70s. So I start thinking, when I hear something like that, maybe this is not, what's going on in the city of Allentown is not something new, but where I thought what's going on is a 30-year plan, maybe this is a 60-year plan. Well, now that these communities are growing, let's eliminate this ward system, because we're not going to live here with them anymore, and we can be on the outside, but we can still control it. See, guys, we're not fighting, and this is what I say. The city of Allentown has been Democrat run for the better part of 30 years, okay? So if anybody in here is looking for the big bad racists in the Republican Party, they're not here. Okay, so we need to be wise. And just so you can see, my father was a 50-year New York Democrat. So you understand, I'm looking at the big picture, and that's where I come from. So we return to a ward system, and there are some people, I actually saw a conversation on Facebook just a couple weeks ago talking about getting a seat at the table. And I understand that sentiment, and I understand that desire, see, because I was thinking like that for the past 10 years. This is my friend April Riddick, and she can tell you, she's like, Tim, you got to do this, you got to do that. And we've had these conversations about getting to the table. But see, what happens, brother, is that people get to this table and they become part of the grains in this table. They become part of the stains in this table. And I'm not part of that table. I don't want to, and the desire to have a seat at that table, trust me, has left me. I don't want a seat anymore. I don't want to buy a seat. I don't want to build a seat. You know what I do? I break the table and I create an environment where we bring our own table and we lead the way into the future of this city. That's what I believe in. Thank you.
Next up, we have Cheryl Watts, who's also running for the mayor of Allentown. You're welcome.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? How's everybody doing? I mean, really, how is everybody doing? Okay? Because here's what's going on right now. We're going to talk about politics, and we're going to talk about why I'm even in the idea of running for an office. I'm Cheryl Johnson Watts. I am running for the mayor of Allentown. I'm on the Democratic ticket. I came to Allentown in 2012. I was living in East Stroudsburg. I met my husband when I was doing some work in Pennsylvania. We got married. I was employed in New York, and I commuted. Ultimately, it got to the point where that commute was getting to be too much, and he said, well, you got to find work here. Started to learn a lot about the opportunities. How you doing? I started to learn a lot about the opportunities that exist for a woman of color in the city of East Stroudsburg. And I found an opportunity to work for Merrill Lynch. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background in a minute. But when I started working for Merrill Lynch, I was living in East Stroudsburg, and they said, you have an opportunity to be in our Fogelsville office, because we don't have any offices in East Stroudsburg. Okay. So I had friends in the Lehigh Valley. Some of you may know Fulton Fulton, Marianne Massey. And they told me about the place that I moved to in Allentown. When I started living and working in Allentown, I began to recognize a number of things that were happening here. Things coming from New York that I kind of didn't expect to see happening in this day and age. But I realized that if anything was going to change, it wasn't going to be because I was complaining, it was going to be because I had taken action. There are a lot of things that happen in this world that I have realized that life had been preparing me for a moment such as this. I grew up in a city called New York, in a section of town called Bayside. And the reason that we were in Bayside is because my father had a job all the way out in Long Island. I was born in Pominock, which is a housing project across the street from Queens College in Flushing, Queens. My father had an apprenticeship at Grumman Aerospace. He got that through his GI Bill opportunity. He told my mother that eventually we would get a home. We got the home in Bayside. They were very upset because my father found a home where my mother loved the rose bushes, but they weren't looking for black people to live on that block. We were supposed to live across the bridge. My mother died within a year of us moving into that house. But I know that she put her life at stake in order to make sure that we had opportunities that she didn't quite have, that my father didn't quite have. Tell you a little bit about their parents. My grandfather, on my mother's side, was from Panama. He brought his family here when my mother was a young child. He was a plumber, worked on the canal zone. My grandmother, she washed clothes for a judge. And when they came here, he took his plumbing skills and he was able to acquire property in Brooklyn. Because a lot of people say, hey, you can have this house if you want to take care of it, you can have it. And what he did is he took that home and he took another brownstone and he helped people relocate to the United States. So when I was a little kid, I remember seeing mail for people that I never saw. And then I also remember seeing mail for people that lived upstairs in a single-room occupancy, because that was the American dream, because ultimately America had all of the opportunity. Well, my mother refused to speak Spanish because she looked like me, and it was easier for her to say she was black. Now we have choices on our census forms. Are you Hispanic? Are you white? Are you white from Hispanic origin? Are you black from Hispanic origin? That's all new. When she was growing up, she was called spick and span. And she decided her life would be easier if she did not speak Spanish. She decided her life for her kids would be easier if she raised them as simply black. She met my father. My father had a connection to Allentown, which I didn't know until I moved here. My aunt told me that my grandfather, Thad Johnson, was here Monday through Friday, chauffeuring one of the founders of the Hut and Wasserman hat manufacturing company that was over on Vultee. So he was part of the chauffeurs here. I don't know much about his life here in Allentown, but I do know that my grandmother said she didn't want to move. She said because she knew in Brooklyn you couldn't raise a cross on the lawn. So those are the choices that my ancestors made to give me the opportunities that I have. I will never, ever speak against the opportunities and the fight that they gave in order to make sure that I was able to have the best opportunities possible in life. And that is why I ran for school board here in Allentown. So what was I doing between the time that I was born and moved here to Allentown and then decided to run for school board? Well, I worked in sports and entertainment. I was at a cable company, I was in community programming, and I produced local programming to make sure that the community's voice was heard and to make sure that they knew that the company that I was working for cared about them. I learned about corporate citizenship. I learned at that moment that if you are a company and you want to make money in a particular part of town, you need to be accountable to the people who live there and let them know that you appreciate every dollar they spend. And that's what I did. I had a wonderful time meeting people from the Harlem State Office Building, the Black Fashion Museum, the Museo del Barrio, all these other different organizations, because I had to make sure that they knew that what was first Group W, then became Paragon, then became ATC, and then ultimately became Time Warner Cable, that they were on their side and they were going to do whatever they had to do to help. Went from there and worked for MTV Networks. And I will tell you this, out of respect and honor for my mother, I decided to major in Spanish when I was in college, which was Princeton University, 1985. I mention that because there were a number of people like Michelle Obama who were part of my class, my freshman year. And we all knew that we were given an opportunity, not because we were supposed to self-aggrandize or to enrich ourselves, but because we were given an opportunity to be Princeton in the nation's service and in the service of nations. That's the motto for our university. And every last one of us knew our commitment to the people that sacrificed to make sure that we were able to have such an education, not to ever deny it or to ever decry it, but to literally stand for people who could not necessarily say the things that we knew how to say or get in front of the people that we knew how to get in front of to hold them to account. So let me go back to school board. I run for school board in 2017. Not because I think every child needs to go to Princeton, but I did make it clear to people. I've interviewed students about university since 1987. I graduated in 85. And in every city where I was, I met children from the city I lived. But when I was interviewing students for Princeton, living in Allentown, I'm meeting kids from Saucon, meeting kids from Parkland. I'm not meeting kids from Allentown. I will say this, we've seen a few more get into the university over this time. And there are a number of people who graduated from Allen many years ago who are alumni. Now, I'm not saying everybody's got to go to Princeton. I'm not saying everybody's got to go to college. But I am saying people should be able to make a choice. They should be given the level of education that will give them the opportunity to choose. And that is why I ran for school board. So I run for school board, and I get on the school board, and I begin to learn what it means to be on school board. I'm not going to shut up and wait for the first year to learn. I'm going to start speaking from the very beginning. And in a very public meeting, I made it very clear. I saw the word failures as a category on a graph about our children. I made it very clear in that meeting. Oh, excuse me, can we stop using that phrase right now as we're talking? Because that may be a group that you found easier to use as the defining word. However, I hope you don't use that conversation with your colleagues, and I surely hope that you don't use that conversation in front of your students. And we came up with other words. Oh, I piss people off. What do I care? Because at the end of the day, I knew why I was there. I was there because I would have never had an opportunity if my parents decided to put me in a category called failure and thought it was okay to use that on a piece of paper. So at the end of the day, yes, I am on school board. And as I continue to learn more about our great city, because it is a great city, as I continue to learn more about our great city, and as I saw a number of things shifting, I decided I'm going to interview for interim mayor, because I'm going to put on a piece of paper what I want to see happen. What do I want to see happen? I want to see us become a leading city in a global economy. Really? Yeah, because we're already global. We don't even realize how many German companies right now are employing people right here in Allentown. What I want to see happen is that people begin to embrace the diversity within our city and see it as an asset. There was a time in the history of Allentown where you couldn't even speak Spanish. You were supposed to only speak English. Well, that's the past. And if you look at the future of this world, Spanish is one of the major languages spoken. Now, I do speak Spanish. I also speak Portuguese. I also speak French. Haven't spoken French as much business-wise or socially as I have in the past, but I say all of that to say we have people from the Middle East, we have people from Haiti, and people from other parts of Africa who speak French. And if we want to represent and reflect who we have become as a city, it's time for us to embrace it. So, why do I say I want to see Allentown become a leading city in a global economy? Every job that I've had, straight out of college, has been related to my language skills. I worked in Washington Heights and Inwood section of New York. Then when I started at MTV, they were expanding MTV to Brazil. MTV Latino was going to next level. And then there was also MTV Europe starting up. All of these times, I never thought about what was happening if you did not work in a company that was part of what we all now call globalization. Never thought about it. Didn't give it a thought. Then from there, I went to work for the National Basketball Association. Enjoyed working there too, once again, overseas. Now, at the National Basketball Association, that's when I had the opportunity to work for Western Union and go around and make sure that they got their return on their investment on multicultural events. That's when I started to see the power of the dollars that were being spent going back and forth across the US and Latin America, back and forth across the US and the Middle East. And I started to realize, regardless of what everyone else is recognizing, there are a lot more people from across the globe living in this country than we actually want to acknowledge. So, I decided to become a consultant full-time. The NBA offers the opportunity for me to continue to work for them. And then I did that on my own for 9 years. But healthcare came up. health issues came up. And I began to realize I'm not going to pay $600 a month to have coverage, not on the income that I was experiencing. So went back to work, 9 to 5. And I ended up working for a company called Information Management Network that produced conferences for the public pension as well as foundations and endowments and other institutional investors. Well, little did I know that that was going to give me an education that was going to change my life, because I was always interested in sports and entertainment. But because they knew that I was really skilled at meeting people, introducing people, they said, take that, learn about finance, and build a practice. And so that's what I did. So I began to learn about investment principles. I began to understand why a lot of our public pensions are trying to figure out whether to go defined benefit or defined contribution. That's a whole separate conversation. But I will tell you, it is at the heart of what a lot of us have to think about when we retire. So I created these conferences, and then I also learned about municipal finance, learned about opportunity zones, learned about all the very same things that are taking critical roles in the path of our life. In some cases, we see them as creating great opportunities, and in other cases, we see them as pulling the life out of our city. So the reason why I see myself as qualified for the role of mayor in Allentown is because I understand all sides of the conversation. I understand the investor interest, but I also understand that these opportunity zones are often created for investors, and the community is not involved in the equation. And the only way the community is involved in the equation is if there is collaboration, inclusion, and communication. And that's why my slogan is, we're all in this together. Because I'm not saying to people, stop the building. What I'm saying to people is, why the building? What I'm saying to people is, what do you intend to do for others through the building? And who do you think is going to benefit from it? I don't mind having those hard conversations. Ask anybody on the school board. They will tell you. Cheryl has no problem having a tough conversation with anybody. As a matter of fact, I may have pissed some people off. It's okay. Because I'm not on the school board to be anybody's friend. I'm on the school board to make sure that our children have the best education possible. And I'm learning that I can do that from a number of different places. So for all of you who are worried about what's going to happen to your children, trust me, there are many people who are coming forward who are going to make sure that they are well provided for. There's a lot of work that has to be done, and we are just getting started. But I wanted to make it very clear about who I am and where I come from and why people might not want to see me succeed. Because I'm really not here for myself. Because if I was here for myself, I would probably be commuting back and forth to New York and earning a different wage. I'm going to be real with you. I'm breaking it down for you. And I'm sorry. I see things that make no sense to me. We have many qualified people who live right here in the city of Allentown, who have to travel to Philadelphia, have to travel to Manhattan in order to earn a living wage. And meanwhile, there are people earning a living wage in Allentown who do not live here. I would like for every individual to look deep into their heart and try to figure out why that is. So, my goal is collaboration, inclusion, and communication. I do believe that I can move this city forward, that I will have the necessary conversations. Oh, and how would I do that? I would create task forces. I think our commissions and authorities, those are wonderful entities, but right now we need boots on the ground and people who are actually being impacted by everything that is happening to speak to what needs to occur. I need to hear directly from individuals who are impacted directly. Not necessarily people who have found their way into appointments, but people who have made themselves very known that they have something to say. So I'm going to close out with this thought. I smile, I laugh, I cry. I'm a human being. But I will tell you this much. When it comes down to making sure that each and every person receives not just what people want to throw their way, but what they should receive because they are a human being, I will do what I have to do to make sure that they get that. So I don't know if that's quite what you wanted to hear from me this evening, but that's what's there for me. And I see you have a question, and I failed to thank you for having. I did personally, but I just want to thank you for.
Are you the last one running for mayor here?
No.
Well, I have a question for. I'm in the three of you.
Yes.
I have a question for all three of you, mayor. I'm having a problem with what are you going to do next year or the year after when this bill comes due? What are you going to do? Continue to raise the taxes to take care of that? What are you proposed to put in place for that to be taken care of? Because I'm a business owner, I own a home, and the taxes are getting so high that you're going to have to move out the house because we can't afford the taxes. What are we going to do about that? What are you going to do about that?
Exactly. And just so you know, this is a 2-year term, so I think that's a wonderful thing because it puts me in a position where people can't turn around and say, oh, you're moving too quick. You're trying to make too much change. No, I got 2 years to prove myself, and maybe you'll reelect me. Here's the bottom line. Our city is structured in a way right now where our revenue is coming from taxes, permits, fees, and maybe a few other places where we catch people and we say, hey, you gotta pay up. We're not generating revenue as a city. I have different approaches that I think that we can take in order to generate revenue. And I know, Joe, you talked about grants, but I think that there are ways that we can do it where it's an enterprise, where people are actually getting jobs, where people are actually getting opportunities. You talk about what can happen for the reentry program. Maybe if we had some programs where we actually focus in on giving jobs to those people who are reentering, we can generate an enterprise that generates dollars. Do you know that money is made off of these private prison situations, that people are working jobs inside those prisons? They are getting experience. Perhaps maybe we need to move that outside of a prison and maybe give people a launch pad so that they can go off and start their own. Just last week, I had a gentleman come and speak on minority and women-owned business enterprises. His name is Michael S. Jackson. He was the in-house counsel for Powell Steel, which was one of the largest black-owned businesses in the state of Pennsylvania. This gentleman, Steele, Powell, who passed away a few years back, he bought the company from his employer. Took him 3 years to pull together $2 million, and eventually that company was bringing in $25 million every year. So I say all of this to say the opportunities and the possibilities are there, but the city has to begin to create revenue. And if the city is not generating revenue outside of permits and fees and all those other things, then yes, we're going to continue to have the troubles that we're having. And there are scenarios where the city has passed on the risk of certain enterprises to third parties, and those third parties are not necessarily helping the city share in the profits. So what we have to do is start to generate some things where the city can create it and the city can benefit from it. So we can wait until that point, right? When he comes up, he can do his? Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Joe. Anybody have more questions, Joe? I'm sorry.
I'll get the answer I'm asking. Well, I want to know from each all three of them, but, this, we have
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You said the problem with taxes, the city of Allentown does not have a revenue issue. They're collecting 44% higher than the rate of inflation, and they're spending 44 higher than the rate of inflation, and they're only collecting at 20% higher than the rate of inflation. The problem in Allentown is irresponsible spending. They're overspending. We have a city that's overstaffed and is overspending at every department. They cut an entire department and they kept the workers. They kept the liability, okay? And I've reminded our city council and our mayor many times over, when our mayor was a city council member himself, the city taxes are collected for services rendered. If we cut a department, it's not, oh, well, don't worry, buddy, I'll find another position for you. No, I'm sorry, I didn't protect your position. I cut your department, and now I cut your job. So they're overspending. I exposed this 5.5 years ago. They're overspending in one department alone with these workers, $5.5 million. In another department, another $3.5 million. I exposed this 5-6 years ago, brother. They don't care. It's that simple. They don't care. They're overspending, and they don't care. And I'm going to go back to the original point. By taxation, by fees, by doing these things. And the mayor, our city mayor, I've known him since I was 11 years old, right? Personally, I'll say, hey, he's a great guy. But as mayor, absolutely not. Because he's already guaranteed that next year and the year after that he's going to raise taxes again. And in my opinion, it's to gentrify the city of Allentown. So again, you want somebody to fight? Here I am. Thank you.
Next is Patrick Palmer for the mayor of Allentown.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for staying here late with us tonight. It's about 9. I really appreciate it. I'm not going to talk for long. I'm not going to talk at you or, take an extended period of time. I did have a speech ready, and so I'm just gonna go away from that. To give you a little bit of background without taking too long. Am I allowed to walk away from this? Oh, okay. Give you a little bit of background without taking too long. One of the things that got me involved with politics was my aunt. She actually assisted with building the park on Cedar Crest. Her name's Paulette Hunter. That was her idea. She got the funding. She did the grants. She did everything to get that built. And through that, seeing that process, seeing everything going on with that, it led me to learn that one of the things you do is you do it for people. You don't do it for the recognition. You do it because you know it's right. And through that, I started doing things like Habitat for Humanity, building homes for individuals that are less fortunate, Meals on Wheels, coat drives, food drives, things like that. One thing that got me involved in politics itself was I had a bad incident where I had to end up calling the police. But when I did actually call the police, they treated me like I was the problem. So that right there kind of turned me into, well, something needs to change. I then started getting more involved with the city itself. I joined our city's Human Relations Commission. I'm now the chairman of the Human Relations Commission, and what we do there is we deal with all diversity and discrimination that takes place in the city. So if you have any kind of discrimination, anything like that, it actually comes to me, and then we go ahead and deal with that accordingly for whatever is need be. I'm on our CETA board, which deals with property sales throughout the city, buying and selling of property. So that's just a little background for myself. I'm not going to go any further into that. But what got me going was when I decided to start doing this, I was told, you want to make sure that you're running with your head and with your heart. You guys have heard that a lot tonight. So to go ahead and let you know how I'm using my head. As being chairman of our Human Relations Commission, I was also a supervisor at Wells Fargo. And when I first started, I was asked, how do you want to run this? Do you want to run this for the people above you and make them happy, or do you want to run this for the people below you and make them happy? Well, my choice was the people below me. My choice was the people that I didn't think were below me. I thought that were going with me, working with me to make this a better place. So through that gives me the experience that I needed to make sure that I can go ahead and run for something like being mayor of Allentown. Now, this is where it starts to get a little personal. This is where my heart starts to kick in. So as I'm doing things, working with the Human Relations Commission, I start to work with other organizations. I start to work with places like Promise Neighborhood. I start to work with places like even, let's say, Rillick. I start to work with places like Reciprocity. I start to work with other charities, other homeless, or other organizations that help the homeless. and you start to notice some things. You start to notice that the homeless aren't getting the care that they need. You start to notice that people are working 3 jobs just to make ends meet, just to be able to say that I can afford to live in this apartment 1 more month. You start to realize that even though we have a homeless problem, we have a bigger problem with people that are 1 step away from being homeless. You start to realize that 66% of our jobs that are paying over $80,000 that are in Allentown are going to people outside of Allentown. You start to realize that discrimination is running rampant when it comes to someone who just wants to rent an apartment, someone who's coming back. Recidivism is kicking in because they can't get an apartment. People are going back because when they do get the apartment, they're 1 day late on that rent and they get sent right back out onto the street. You start to realize that 2 blocks away from the NIS zone, there's tents up that get taken down in the middle of the night. You start to realize there is no homeless shelter. You start to realize that our warming shelter is the only option that they have. These are things that start to hit me in the heart. And then I started to realize there's no one here making this change. There's us that are working on the ground floor. There's us that are doing things to help, but there's no one here making change. To the brother that was speaking earlier that was saying, well, what are we doing to change the system? I'm trying to prevent kids from going into the system. I'm trying to stop this before it turns into a problem. We have a gentleman in the crowd right now. His name is Kalfani. He's one of our credible messengers. He's one that I picked. He's one that's going out and speaking to the youth right now to prevent violence. So when we say, what are we doing to make sure that there's no violence happening? I'm already working that fight. I'm already fighting that fight. I'm here to make sure that no youth is being a victim of violence. Do you know we've had 6 murders in Allentown in this year alone? Guess how many have gone unsolved? 5. 5 already. How are we working with the police to help them solve that? We have no trust in the police. I'm here to make sure that we bring that trust back by doing things like accountability boards that we need. That's something that's worked in other cities. To find out how to fix this city, we don't have to look far. We don't have to go far. When we're doing things like having our zero youth violence, that's not something where it's some magical program. No, that's something that we picked out from somewhere else. That's something that we're using that's proven to work. This city just needs to realize that it needs a new way of thinking. It needs the youth. When people say things like, oh, we need someone to stand up, I'm right here. I'm standing up for this city. I'm 31 years old, and I realize we have all these problems, and we need to do something about these problems right now. So when you say, do you have the experience? Yes, I have the experience. I've been working with the city for the last 3 years. I've been having my head in this city for the last 3 years. I've been going to meetings. I've been showing up. I don't just go and argue. No, I go for a reason. Why are you doing this? How do we prevent this from happening in the future? Right now, I'm running a program called Inside Allentown. That's working with the school district to make sure that our kids have a choice. Kids right now think that when they graduate, they don't know what they're going to do. They have no idea what to do. I take these kids and I take them to different parts of Allentown while they're in high school and try to get them to figure out what do they want, what do they need, what do they need to succeed. Right now, we take them to City Hall, water filtration facility, recycling plants, fire, EMS, working with even the police so they can get a better understanding and get cooperation. These are different things that I'm doing right now to help prevent situations from being bad. There's people in this city, there are children in this city that aren't even going to college because they can't afford the forms that they need to fill out to go to college. Those are programs that I'm assisting with because if they can't afford that form to go to college, what do they end up doing? Working a minimum wage job because they don't know any better. We're here to prevent things like that from happening. I don't want to be reactive. I'm being proactive. And when I'm mayor, I will be proactive. We need to make sure that we do these things to stop it from getting to the point of now they have no food to eat. Now they're doing things like, and I hate to say it, sex trafficking themselves. They're doing things like selling their bodies just so they can get a room to sleep in at night. But that's because they don't have a job that pays them fair wages. We need to make sure that these jobs in Allentown that are paying fair wages are staying in Allentown, not the people outside of Allentown. We need to make sure that they are here for these children to be able to succeed. So I could keep going deeper and deeper into it, but once again, I didn't want to take up much of your time because I know it's getting late. And I want to answer your question as well. And so from what I remember of your question, it was what to do about the tax situation. Was that the question, or?
Yeah, the question was, for the older people that own homes, their houses are paid off. Now, if you're gonna raise taxes every year, how do we stay in our houses to pay taxes? That's the problem. I've been seeing that for years in other cities, and it's a problem here now.
Okay, and that question, that goes a little deep. First, I want to go ahead and come to an understanding of the city doesn't have very many ways to make money. When the city does actually raise taxes, it creates a better revenue than anything else the city can possibly do. Us, ourselves, that's not why the taxes were raised. The taxes were raised 27%, which is possibly not even enough because of negligence that took place for the last 10 years. That's something that's been admitted to. That's something that they're trying to rectify. The way I feel about the tax situation is, no, we don't always need to raise taxes. There are other ways for the city to look into grants. There are ways for the city to go ahead and do things, but it needs to raise its credit rating. Those are things that they have to do, but in order to do that, they need someone to be moving into the city. So to answer your question, we need to work on what's going on in this city to make sure we don't have another 27% tax increase, to make sure we don't have to keep working to raise these taxes. We need to do things like fix the blight situation that's going on. We need to make sure that when residents are moving here, they're moving here and they're able to sustain a living life here. You see things like $1,400 rent buildings being constructed, while 2 blocks down, you're seeing a dilapidated, blighted building. We need to make sure that we're fixing those blighted buildings. We need to make sure that when that building gets fixed, that allows somebody else to move in here. When somebody else moves in, your taxes won't go up because other people are moving in. So we need to work on rebuilding what we have already, put that back on the tax rolls, and make sure that people have the ability to sustain a living wage while they're moved here.
That's part, good answer, but the problem is, I think, you got all these businesses that come into town. They got tax-free for 10 years, okay? That's the problem. Now, you say raise the taxes on the homeowners and all that good stuff. These people have got businesses here, getting money from the community, but don't have to pay no taxes, and we paying for it. So as you, as mayor, what will you do about that?
Well, if a place is moving in now and it's getting that kind of leeway, let's say the 10 years, that's something that needs to be reworked. That's something that needs to be looked at because we're all in this together and we all need to make a change that makes sense. So when you're making a change that makes sense, we need to make sure if a business is choosing to move in here, we let them know, A, it's not tax-free for 10 straight years. B, you need to be hiring a certain amount of people that live in Allentown. So if you're a big business moving in, no more looking outside of Allentown to go ahead and get your residents. You need to be hiring 70%. Let's use that number, 70% need to be living here in Allentown. Because while that business is paying taxes, it's also paying our residents who then shop in Allentown, who then spend the money back in Allentown, who put money back into Allentown, which then helps ease the taxes. So that way we don't have to keep raising them every single year.
That's why the brothers, we are going to be going to city council, and these questions we're going to be asked on there, because I think that's where it's going to have to start. Thank you.
Because now that you're human relations chairman, what are you doing? Because when I was on the human relations commission, a lot of people were being kicked up to Harrisburg because we couldn't handle it because we didn't have enough people. But now, since you do pretty much have a full board, what are you doing now as Human Relations Commission as chairman?
Well, we unfortunately don't have a full board. We're at 8 people now.
You have more than we did.
Yeah, so one thing I'm trying to do is try to bring people in that will stay, try to bring people in that do care. We're taking on more cases. We officially, well, this isn't the human relations, but this is Power, which I'm also a part of. We do things like fight for advocates for rights in Allentown as well. I forgot to mention that. But so we actually got a human relations officer put into the budget. So we're going to get someone that makes sure that, you know, all these cases aren't being pushed up to Harrisburg. So we're going to have someone who's officially on the tax rolls or who's officially on the payroll, making sure that when something like a complaint does come to, let's say, or go to Harrisburg, it comes back to us. It's something that we can go ahead and handle. It's something that we can look into. This individual will also be going to different events, spreading the word, making sure everyone knows that there is someone out there fighting for them. So there's a lot going on. We're also looking into different events. We're working with the schools as well to make sure that the schools are integrated in. We're trying to assist with the bullying that's taking place in our schools. We're getting them involved with making different, making a logo for us. So there's different events that we're doing, and there's different ways that we're spreading the word and making sure that we're handling all the discrimination that takes place in Allentown.